Captain Zektar of the voidling slave ship, Cruel Harvest. Watched the blue-green planet rotate slowly beneath his vessel. His 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he studied the sensor readings. The third planet in this system showed all the signs of a primitive civilization, perfect for harvesting. Energy signatures indicate basic nuclear technology, his Lieutenant Grax reported, his scaled hands dancing over the control panel. No defensive orbital platforms, no faster-than-light capability detected. Zektar's mandibles clicked with amusement. After 300 years of raiding primitive worlds, this felt routine. The Voidling Empire had built its wealth on the backs of lesser species, and this planet, the inhabitants called it Earth, according to their intercepted communications, would be no different. "Begin scanning for population centers," Zektar ordered. "Focus on smaller settlements. We want healthy specimens without the complications of large military responses." The Cruel Harvest descended through Earth's atmosphere under cloak, its sensors mapping the surface. The ship's artificial intelligence cataloged thousands of potential targets, but one location caught Zektar's attention. A cluster of buildings surrounded by open fields, filled with young members of the dominant species. "What is this structure?" he asked, pointing at the facility on his screen. Grax consulted the ship's translation matrix. According to their communications, it appears to be an educational facility for their offspring. They call it a school. Perfect, Zektar thought. Young specimens were always more valuable in the galactic slave markets. They adapted faster, lived longer, and brought premium prices from buyers across the galaxy. The fact that these particular younglings were gathered in one convenient location made the raid almost too easy. The school sat in a rural area outside a town called Millfield. Rolling hills surrounded the modest brick building, and a small playground occupied one corner of the property. It was early morning, and yellow vehicles were depositing dozens of human children at the entrance. 37 young specimens detected, the ship's computer announced in its mechanical voice. Age range appears to be between 5 and 12 standard years. Minimal adult supervision observed. Zektar felt the familiar thrill of a successful hunt. In his long career, he had raided hundreds of worlds and captured thousands of beings. Some had fought back desperately, others had cowered in fear, but all had ultimately submitted to the inevitable. These humans would be no different. "Deploy capture drones," he commanded. 6 sleek metallic spheres dropped from the ship's belly, each equipped with stun weaponry and containment fields. They descended toward the school like silent predators, their advanced technology far beyond anything these primitives could comprehend. The first indication of trouble came from the playground. A group of children had been playing something they called tag when the drones appeared. Instead of screaming and running as expected, several of the younglings pointed at the approaching spheres with excitement. "Look! UFOs!" shouted a boy with freckles and sandy hair. "Are those real aliens?" asked a girl with pigtails jumping up and down. Zektar frowned as he watched the scene unfold through the drone cameras. These young ones showed no fear, only curiosity. On every other world he had raided, the mere appearance of his technology had sent populations into panic. What was wrong with these humans? The drones activated their stun beams, expecting to render the children unconscious for easy collection. The blue energy struck the first group of younglings, and they collapsed to the ground as planned. But before the drones could begin the collection process, something unexpected happened. An adult human, the drone's sensors identified her as the teacher, came rushing out of the building. Instead of fleeing or attempting to hide, she positioned herself between the fallen children and the drones. Her face showed an expression Zektar had rarely seen directed at his forces, pure, undiluted rage. "Get away from my students!" Sarah Chen screamed, grabbing a wooden baseball bat from the playground equipment. The lead drone turned its weapons toward her, but she was already moving. With surprising speed and coordination, she swung the primitive wooden club at the floating sphere. The impact should have been negligible against the drone's armored hull, but somehow the device sparked and wobbled in the air. "Impossible," Grax muttered, checking his readings. "That primitive weapon shouldn't be able to damage our technology." More adults were emerging from the school now. Other teachers, maintenance staff, and a few early arriving parents. Instead of scattering in terror as Zektar had witnessed on countless other worlds, they were organizing. Someone had pulled a fire alarm, and the piercing sound was drawing attention from the surrounding area. The school's principal, a man named Robert Martinez, grabbed an emergency radio and began speaking rapidly into it. Within minutes, the drone's sensors were detecting incoming vehicles, fast-moving ground transports that the ship's computer identified as police cars and fire trucks. "Sir," Grax said nervously, "perhaps we should abort. This is not proceeding according to protocol." But Zektar was fascinated. In 3 centuries of raids, he had never encountered a species that responded to attack with such immediate, coordinated defense. Most civilizations required hours or days to mount any meaningful resistance. These humans were mobilizing a response in minutes. More concerning was the effectiveness of their primitive weapons. The baseball bat had somehow disrupted one drone's anti-gravity systems, causing it to crash into a tree. Another drone was sparking and listing badly after a janitor named Pete Williams had thrown his heavy toolbox at it with remarkable accuracy. The human younglings who hadn't been stunned were not cowering or crying. Instead, they were cheering their protectors and, in some cases, joining the defense effort. A 10-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez had grabbed a handful of rocks and was pelting the drones with surprising accuracy. Her throws were causing visible damage to the sophisticated machinery. "How are they doing this?" Zektar demanded. "Our drones are military-grade equipment. They should be impervious to primitive weapons." The ship's tactical computer ran a quick analysis. "Unknown, Captain. The humans appear to be exploiting weaknesses in our technology that should not be exploitable. Their coordination and response time are also far beyond projected parameters for a primitive species." On the ground, more reinforcements were arriving. The local police had called for backup, and military vehicles were racing toward the school. But it wasn't just the official responders that worried Zektar. Ordinary civilians were arriving and immediately joining the defense effort. A farmer named Joe Thompson pulled up in his pickup truck, grabbed a shotgun from his gun rack, and began firing at the drones. The primitive projectile weapons shouldn't have been able to penetrate the drone's shields, but somehow they were. Each shot sent sparks flying from the sophisticated machines. News helicopters were circling overhead now, broadcasting the event to the wider world. The ship's communication array was picking up thousands of transmissions as humans around the globe learned of the attack. Instead of causing panic, the news seemed to be mobilizing more humans to action. "Captain," the communications officer reported, "we're detecting massive movement of human military assets toward this location. They're responding as if this were a planetary invasion." Which, Zektar reflected grimly, it essentially was. The situation deteriorated rapidly from there. The remaining drones were either destroyed or disabled within the hour. Not a single human child had been successfully captured. Worse, several pieces of voidling technology now lay scattered across the school grounds, ready to be studied by human scientists. But the most troubling development was what the ship's sensors were detecting in orbit. Massive energy signatures were approaching from across the planet. The humans were launching everything they had, primitive by galactic standards, but far more advanced than the initial scans had suggested. "Sir," Grax said, his voice tight with fear, "I'm reading multiple nuclear-powered vessels rising from the planet's surface. Their targeting systems they're locking onto us." Zektar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In less than 2 hours, these primitive humans had not only successfully defended against his raid, but had somehow detected his cloaked ship and were now mounting a counterattack. The first missile struck the cruel Harvester's shields 30 seconds later. The ship rocked under the impact, and alarm klaxons began blaring throughout the vessel. "Impossible!" Zektar roared. "They couldn't have broken through our cloak. They don't have the technology." But even as he spoke, more missiles were incoming. Dozens of them, launched from multiple locations across the planet's surface. The humans had somehow not only detected his ship, but had triangulated its exact position. The cruel Harvest's shields flickered under the sustained bombardment. These weren't the crude nuclear weapons the initial scans had suggested. The missiles carried sophisticated targeting systems and warheads that seemed specifically designed to disrupt voidling technology. "Emergency jump," Zektar ordered. "Get us out of here!" But when Grax tried to engage the faster-than-light drive, nothing happened. The ship's computers reported a complete malfunction in the jump system. "The humans' weapons are somehow interfering with our FTL capability," the chief engineer reported over the comm system. "It's like they knew exactly which systems to target." On the main screen, more human ships were rising from the planet's surface. But these weren't the primitive spacecraft the initial scans had detected. They were sleek, advanced vessels that looked almost alien. "Where did they get that technology?" Zektar whispered. His question was answered when one of the human ships opened a communication channel. The face that appeared on the screen was definitely human, but the uniform and the technology behind him were unmistakable. "Attention, voidling vessel," the human commander said calmly. "This is Admiral Sarah Patterson of the Earth Defense Force. You have attempted to abduct children under the protection of the Terran Federation. You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded." Zektar's four eyes widened in horror as he recognized the symbols on the human's uniform. They weren't primitive at all. They were members of the Galactic Council, one of the most powerful political and military alliances in known space. But that was impossible. The records clearly showed this was a primitive world, recently emerged from their industrial age. There was no way they could be council members. "You're lying," he transmitted back. "Earth isn't a member of the council. You're a primitive species." Admiral Patterson smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. "Captain Zektar of the Voidling Empire, you are under arrest for attempted kidnapping, illegal use of weapons against a civilian population, and violation of the Galactic Convention on the Protection of Developing Worlds." The cruel Harvest shuddered as tractor beams locked onto the hull. All around them, human ships were moving into position. Zektar realized with growing horror that he wasn't just facing a primitive species that had gotten lucky. He was facing a trap that had been carefully prepared and executed. "Sir," Grax whispered, "what are your orders?" Zektar stared at the screen, watching as boarding pods detached from the human ships and headed toward his vessel. In 300 years of raiding, he had never imagined that he might one day be the one captured. As the first human boarding teams breached his ship's hull, Zektar finally understood the truth that would soon spread terror throughout the Voidling Empire and across the galaxy. Earth wasn't a primitive world ripe for exploitation. It was a carefully maintained deception, designed to lure predators like himself into a trap they couldn't escape. And the creatures he had dismissed as weak, primitive humans were about to show him exactly why the galaxy's greatest predators had learned to fear the name of Earth. The interrogation room aboard the human vessel, Righteous Fury, was nothing like the primitive chambers Zektar had expected. Clean white walls, sophisticated monitoring equipment, and a conference table that looked like it belonged in a galactic embassy rather than on a ship from a primitive world. Admiral Patterson sat across from him, her uniform bearing insignia that Zektar now recognized as those of a Council fleet admiral. Beside her sat another human, this one wearing the robes of a galactic tribunal judge. "Let's start with the basics," Admiral Patterson said, her voice calm and professional. You are Captain Zektar, commander of the voidling slave ship Cruel Harvest. Your vessel's logs show 847 successful raids across 312 different worlds over the past 3 centuries. Zektar's mandibles clicked nervously. Those records are classified under voidling military law. The judge, who had introduced himself as Justice Chen, smiled slightly. Not anymore. Your ship's computer surrendered all data when our technicians interfaced with it. Voidling encryption is adequate, but hardly challenging for our systems. This was impossible. Voidling encryption was based on quantum-entangled algorithms that should have been beyond the capabilities of any species that hadn't achieved true galactic civilization. Yet these humans spoke of breaking it as if it were a child's puzzle. I demand to know how you obtained council membership, Zektar said. Your world was surveyed less than 50 years ago. You were still using chemical rockets and splitting atoms for energy. Admiral Patterson exchanged a glance with Justice Chen before responding. That's an interesting assumption, Captain. Tell me, who conducted that survey? Zektar frowned. The question seemed irrelevant, but he answered anyway. The survey was conducted by Exploration Fleet Gamma 7 under Commander Yilthek of the Hegemony Science Division. Ah, yes, Commander Yilthek, the Admiral said, consulting a datapad. We have quite an extensive file on him. Did you know he's been selling survey data to slavers for the past century? The words hit Zektar like a physical blow. Survey data was supposed to be classified and restricted to council members only. If Yilthek had been selling information to slavers, it meant... You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Justice Chen activated a holographic display in the center of the table. It showed a series of documents, all bearing official hegemony seals. Commander Yilthek was arrested 6 months ago on charges of corruption, illegal information trafficking, and conspiracy to facilitate slavery. His trial revealed an extensive network of corrupt officials who had been falsifying survey reports. The hologram shifted to show a star chart marked with dozens of worlds. All of these planets were marked as primitive and suitable for exploitation in Yilthek's reports. Every single one of them was actually a fully developed council member world conducting covert operations. Zektar stared at the display, his 4 eyes growing wide with horror. Nearly half the worlds on that list were places he had raided personally. No, that can't be right. We captured thousands of beings from those worlds. If they were council members, you captured exactly who they wanted you to capture, Admiral Patterson said quietly. Volunteers? Undercover agents? People who knew they might not come back, but were willing to sacrifice themselves to maintain the deception. The room seemed to spin around Zektar. Everything he thought he knew about his successful career was crumbling. Why? He whispered. Why would they do that? Justice Chen leaned forward. Because the council needed to understand how the slave trade really worked. We needed to infiltrate the networks, identify the buyers, trace the money, and map the entire illegal operation. The only way to do that was from the inside. Your raids weren't random successes, Captain, Admiral Patterson added. They were carefully orchestrated intelligence operations designed to lead us deeper into the criminal networks that plague our galaxy. Zektar felt sick. The Voidling Empire. We thought we were predators. We thought we were the strongest. You're parasites, the Admiral said bluntly. And like all parasites, you only survived because your hosts allowed it. The moment you became too much of a problem, you were eliminated. The holographic display changed again, this time showing a real-time galactic map. Red dots marked the locations of voidling ships across hundreds of star systems. As Zektar watched in fascination and growing terror, the red dots began disappearing one by one. What's happening? He asked. Operation Clean Sweep, Justice Chen explained. Every voidling ship in known space is being simultaneously intercepted by Council forces. Your entire fleet is being captured as we speak. The scope of it was staggering. Thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of voidling raiders, all being rounded up in a coordinated operation that spanned half the galaxy. The planning and coordination required would have taken decades. "How long?" Zektar asked weakly. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the Council was formed 800 years ago," Admiral Patterson replied. "The elimination of slavery has always been one of our primary goals. But we needed to be smart about it. Cut off one head of the Hydra, and two more appear. We needed to destroy the entire system at once." Zektar thought about his home world, about the Voidling Empire that had dominated this sector of space for millennia. What will happen to our people, to our worlds? "That depends," Justice Chen said. "The Voidling government has three choices. They can cooperate with the Council, abandon their slaving operations, and transition to legitimate trade and industry. They can resist and face military action, or they can accept Council oversight and rehabilitation programs." "And if we choose to fight?" Admiral Patterson's expression hardened. "Captain, you've seen a tiny fraction of what humans are capable of. Earth isn't even our primary military world. We're actually considered one of the more diplomatic species in the Council." The implications of that statement settled over Zektar like a cold blanket. If humans, with their terrifying efficiency and advanced technology, were considered diplomatic, what were the actual warrior species like? "I need to understand," he said desperately. "Your world, when we scanned it, we saw cities, technology, normal development for a young civilization. How did you hide the truth?" Admiral Patterson smiled for the first time since the interrogation began. "We didn't hide anything, Captain. Everything you saw was real." Zektar's confusion must have shown on his face because she continued. "Earth really is a relatively young civilization. We achieved spaceflight about 200 years ago. We made contact with the Council a century and a half ago. We became full members 75 years ago. But your technology, your coordination, comes from being part of a galactic civilization that shares knowledge and resources," she explained. "When humans joined the Council, we didn't just gain access to advanced technology. We gained access to the accumulated wisdom and experience of hundreds of species across thousands of worlds." Justice Chen activated another display, this one showing the internal structure of human society. "What makes humans particularly effective isn't our technology, Captain. It's our social structure. We're a species that excels at cooperation, adaptation, and integration of new concepts. Most species join the Council and spend decades or centuries learning to work with others," Admiral Patterson added. "Humans learned it in decades. We were ready for major operations within a generation." Zektar studied the displays, trying to understand. "But the children at the school, they fought back like trained warriors." "Those were just normal human children," the Admiral said with obvious pride. "Human young are taught from birth to think independently, to protect each other, and to never give up in the face of adversity. They don't need military training to show courage." "Your species mistakes kindness for weakness," Justice Chen observed. "You see cooperation and assume vulnerability. You interpret diplomacy as an inability to fight. These are fundamental misunderstandings that have led to your downfall." The interrogation continued for hours, with the humans methodically dismantling everything Zektar believed about galactic power structures, the nature of civilization, and the relationship between technology and society. They showed him records of other slaver species that had been eliminated over the centuries, each one convinced of their own superiority right up until the moment of their capture. The hegemony enslavers thought their psionic abilities made them unstoppable, Admiral Patterson explained, showing images of a now extinct species. The Crimson Fleet believed their adaptive biotechnology gave them an unbeatable advantage. The Shadow Syndicate was convinced their stealth capabilities made them invisible. What happened to them? They discovered that raw power means nothing against coordinated intelligence and superior strategy, Justice Chen said. The Council has access to every advantage they had, plus the combined wisdom of hundreds of civilizations. There is no military capability, no technological advancement, no special ability that some Council member hasn't encountered and learned to counter. As the day wore on, Zektar began to understand the true scope of his situation. The Voidling Empire hadn't just been defeated, it had been outmaneuvered so completely that they had never even realized they were in a conflict. For centuries, they had been carefully managed and manipulated, fed intelligence that made them feel powerful while actually making them easier to track and capture. "What happens to me now?" he finally asked. "That depends on you," Admiral Patterson replied. "You can cooperate with our investigation, help us identify and rescue the victims of your raids, and assist in the rehabilitation of your people. In exchange, you'll be transferred to a minimum security rehabilitation facility where you'll receive education about legitimate trade and industry. Or you can maintain your loyalty to the old ways, in which case you'll spend the rest of your life in a maximum security prison facility designed specifically for dangerous offenders." Zektar considered his options. Outside the interrogation room, he could hear the sounds of a functioning starship, humans going about their duties with the calm efficiency he had witnessed during the capture of his vessel. These weren't primitive savages who had gotten lucky. They were professional soldiers and administrators who had executed a plan decades in the making. "If I cooperate," he said slowly, "what guarantees do I have that you won't simply execute me once you have what you need?" Justice Chen looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Captain, the Council doesn't practice capital punishment except in the most extreme circumstances. The goal is rehabilitation and reintegration, not revenge." "Besides," Admiral Patterson added, "dead slavers don't help us locate and rescue their victims. You have information about hundreds of raids, thousands of captured beings who are still trapped in your network. Their freedom is worth more to us than your punishment." For the first time since his capture, Zektar felt something other than fear and confusion. It was a strange emotion that took him a moment to identify. Hope. "I'll cooperate," he said quietly. Admiral Patterson nodded and made a note on her datapad. "Good. We'll start tomorrow with a full debriefing of your raids over the past 50 years. The more detailed your information, the more beings we can save." As the guards escorted Zektar back to his cell, he reflected on the irony of his situation. He had come to Earth thinking he was the predator, only to discover that he had been prey all along. The humans had let him think he was in control while carefully guiding him exactly where they wanted him to go. For the first time in his life, Zektar wondered what it would be like to be part of something greater than himself, something that protected the weak instead of exploiting them. As the cell door closed behind him, he realized that he was about to find out. 3 months later, Zektar stood in the observation deck of the Council Rehabilitation Station, New Beginnings, watching as another group of rescued slaves was reunited with their families. The space station orbited a peaceful world called Haven, specifically designed for the rehabilitation of both former slaves and their captors. The transformation in Zektar had been remarkable, even by Council standards. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human psychologist assigned to his case, often commented that she had never seen such a complete change in perspective in such a short time. "It's the intelligence factor," she had explained to her colleagues. "Zektar was never truly evil, just operating under a completely false understanding of how the galaxy worked. Once we showed him the truth, his entire worldview shifted." Today marked a special milestone. Zektar was about to participate in his first rescue operation as a Council consultant. His knowledge of voidling slave networks had already led to the liberation of over 12,000 captives, but this would be the first time he actively participated in a rescue. The target was a slave market on the outer rim world of Kepler 442c, one of the largest trafficking hubs in known space. Intelligence suggested that over 50,000 beings from dozens of species were being held there, including some of the children who had been captured from worlds Zektar had raided years ago. Admiral Patterson, now serving as Zektar's liaison and supervisor, joined him at the observation window. "Nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," Zektar admitted, "not of the operation itself, but of what we might find. Some of those beings have been in captivity for years because of me. And now they're going to be free because of you," the Admiral reminded him. "Focus on that." The briefing room was filled with representatives from a dozen different species, all part of the Council's Joint Anti-Slavery Task Force. Zektar recognized some of them from his previous life, species he had once considered enemies or competitors. Now they worked together toward a common goal. Commander Thilek of the Cetacean Defense Force was a massive aquatic being whose people had been victims of voidling raids for centuries. When Zektar had first met him, he had expected hostility or revenge. Instead, Thilek had simply said, "The past is finished. What matters is the future we build together." "The slave market on Kepler 442c has been operating for over 2 centuries, Thilek was explaining to the assembled team. "Our intelligence suggests they're holding beings from over 40 different species, including some who were captured as children and are now adults." Dr. Sarah Kim, a human xenopsychologist, activated a holographic display showing the market's layout. "The psychological rehabilitation needs are going to be extensive. Some of these beings have been in captivity so long, they may not remember their original homes or families." Zektar studied the schematics, his reformed mind automatically identifying security weaknesses and guard patterns. "The market uses a rotation system for high-value captives," he said. "They're moved between different facilities to prevent rescue attempts, but there's a pattern to it." He highlighted several locations on the display. "Every 7 standard days, they transport the most valuable specimens to this central auction house. If we time our attack correctly, we can rescue the priority targets and the general population simultaneously." Admiral Patterson nodded approvingly. "That's excellent intelligence, Zektar. How do you suggest we proceed?" For the next hour, Zektar found himself doing something he had never imagined possible, planning a military operation to save lives instead of destroy them. His knowledge of criminal networks, combined with the Council's resources and the assembled team's expertise, created a rescue plan that was both elegant and effective. The operation began at dawn on Kepler 442c. Council ships materialized out of hyperspace around the planet, immediately jamming all communications and establishing a quarantine field. Unlike the voidling raids Zektar remembered, this was a precisely coordinated operation designed to minimize casualties and maximize the number of beings saved. Zektar was aboard the lead assault ship Liberation, wearing council armor and carrying non-lethal weapons. Beside him was squad leader Maria Santos, a human soldier who had volunteered to work with reformed criminals. "Remember," she said as their dropship descended toward the planet's surface, "our primary objective is saving lives. The slavers are secondary targets." The advice wasn't necessary. Over the past 3 months, Zektar had undergone intensive psychological rehabilitation that had fundamentally changed how he viewed other beings. Where he had once seen property or obstacles, he now saw individuals with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. The slave market was a sprawling complex of cages, auction houses, and living facilities that stretched for kilometers across the planet's surface. As the Council forces moved in, Zektar was struck by the sheer scale of the operation. In his slaving days, he had never really considered where his cargo ended up. Now, seeing the reality of their destinations, he felt a deep sense of shame and determination to make amends. The first facility they liberated was a holding area for recently captured beings. As the doors opened and council soldiers poured in, Zektar saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Hope, returning to eyes that had lost all light. A young Andromedan female, barely past adolescence, cowered in the corner of her cage until she saw the council insignia on the soldiers' uniforms. Then she stood up slowly, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "Are we really free?" "Yes," Squad Leader Santos said gently. "You're free. We're here to take you home." The liberation continued for hours. Each facility they entered revealed more horrors. Beings who had been separated from their families, children who had grown up in captivity, entire species that had been nearly extinct due to slave raids. But it also revealed something else, the incredible resilience of intelligent life. In cage after cage, beings who should have been broken by years of captivity showed strength and dignity that humbled Zektar. They helped each other, shared their meager resources, and maintained their cultural traditions despite everything that had been done to them. The most difficult moment came when they reached the high-security section where the most valuable captives were kept. Here, Zektar came face-to-face with beings he had personally captured years ago. An elderly Syrian philosopher named Gental recognized him immediately. Instead of anger or fear, the old being's face showed something unexpected: curiosity. "You're different," Gental observed. "When you captured me, your aura was that of a predator. Now, you carry the light of someone who protects others." "I'm sorry," Zektar said, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you, to all of you." Gental studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Regret is the beginning of wisdom. What matters is what you do with that wisdom." As the rescue operation continued, Zektar found himself working alongside beings whose people he had terrorized for decades. Yet none of them treated him as an enemy. The Council's approach to rehabilitation was based on the principle that anyone could change if given the opportunity and proper support. Dr. Kim had explained it during one of their sessions. Punishment might satisfy a desire for justice, but it doesn't solve the underlying problems. Rehabilitation and reintegration create lasting change. The final phase of the operation involved confronting the market's operators, a criminal consortium that included members from several different species. As Council forces surrounded their command center, Zektar found himself face-to-face with beings very much like his former self. The market's chief administrator, a voidling named Rekkor, stared at Zektar in disbelief. "You're working with them? You're a traitor to your own species." "No," Zektar replied calmly. "I'm finally serving my species' true interests. The old ways led to nothing but isolation and eventual destruction. The Council offers us a chance to be part of something greater." The confrontation ended without violence. Faced with overwhelming force and no possibility of escape, the criminal consortium surrendered. They would be given the same opportunity for rehabilitation that Zektar had received, though not all would choose to take it. As the last transport ship filled with freed slaves prepared to depart, Admiral Patterson joined Zektar on the observation deck of the Liberation. "How do you feel?" she asked. Zektar watched the ships heading toward their home systems, carrying beings who would soon be reunited with families they thought they would never see again. "Like I finally understand what strength really means." "And what's that?" "True strength isn't the ability to dominate others," he said. "It's the courage to protect those who can't protect themselves, to build something instead of just taking what others have built, and to choose cooperation over competition even when it's harder." Admiral Patterson smiled. "You sound like you're ready for the next phase of your rehabilitation." "What's that?" "Training to become a council mediator. We think you'd be perfect for helping other former slavers make the transition to legitimate society." Zektar considered the offer. A year ago, if someone had told him he would be working to rehabilitate criminals and protect the innocent, he would have laughed. Now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I accept," he said. As the Council fleet departed Kepler 442c, leaving behind a transformed world where a slave market had once operated, Zektar reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had started as a predator, thinking he understood how the galaxy worked. He had learned that he was actually prey, being carefully managed by forces far beyond his understanding. But the final lesson was the most important. He was neither predator nor prey. He was simply a being capable of choosing between helping and harming others. The Council had shown him that the choice to help was always available, no matter how far someone had fallen. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders that no single species could fully comprehend. But when different species worked together, sharing their knowledge and resources, they could accomplish things that none could achieve alone. They could eliminate slavery, protect the innocent, and build a civilization based on cooperation instead of exploitation. As the stars streaked past the observation window, Zektar thought about the children at that Earth school where his transformation had begun. They had shown courage in the face of danger, not because they were trained warriors, but because protecting others was simply the right thing to do. That was the true strength of humanity and of the Council they had helped to build. Not advanced technology or superior firepower, but the understanding that every being deserved freedom, dignity, and the chance to reach their full potential. The former slaver captain turned rehabilitation counselor smiled as he headed toward his quarters to begin studying for his new role. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others find their way from darkness into light. In the end, that was what civilization really meant. The choice to lift others up instead of tearing them down, to build instead of destroy, and to choose hope over fear. It was a lesson that Zektar would spend the rest of his life sharing with others who were ready to learn that there was always a better way.